I believe God's creation of man in Genesis parallels man's creation of artificial intelligence, which is going on right now. So that is the premise of this podcast. We're going to start with parallels. And by parallels, I mean what happened in the Genesis story when God created humans that has already happened in the human story as we've created AI. And then we're going to go from parallels to pitfalls. Pitfalls are comparing God's creation story of man, which obviously God didn't make any mistakes because he's God and he's perfect, to our creation of AI and the mistakes that we've already made and how we've failed and we are a lesser God. I mean, obviously we're not God at all, but we're certainly the lesser God in our creation of AI. Then we're going to go to predictions. Predictions are looking at the Genesis story in the Bible and seeing how man played out in relation to God and making some predictions about how artificial intelligence is going to play out in relation to man. It's mostly negative. I'm not going to lie. The predictions are mostly negative, but there is one hidden positive prediction in there that I think is a reasonable outcome if we turn toward God during this time. But yeah, that's the premise of the podcast. So let's get into those parallels. So the first parallel is obvious. God created man and man created AI. Now, what's interesting is we were made in the image of God, so we have unique abilities that only us in all of creation have because we're made in the image of God. For example, birds can build nests and beavers can build dams, and I'm sure if you went through all of creation, you could find some interesting creations by creation. But every creation, whether it's nests by birds or dams by beavers or whatever by whatever animal, they can only build what's in their genetic code or what they have examples of in their environment. God, when he made Earth and humans, he had a vision in his mind and he was able to speak. Literally, Genesis says he spoke it into real life. So God could bring forth the unseen real. It means that God could have a reality in his head and he could speak it into existence in the material world. Us as humans are the only creature in all of existence that can bring forth the unseen real. We can picture an iPhone in our head and then we can bring it into the material world. We can picture artificial intelligence in our head and we can bring it into the physical world. So in that way, we are made in the image of God, which leads us to our second parallel. The first parallel is that God made man and man made AI. The second parallel is that we're made in the image of God and AI is made in the image of us. So just like God breathed his unique God-like attributes into our humanistic creation, we are training artificial intelligence, computer robots on our behavior. So artificial intelligence will have and mimic a lot of human behavior. That leads to an interesting question. Does artificial intelligence have morality? And the answer is no. Or I would argue that it's no. Why? Well, of course, as we make artificial intelligence, we will try to give it a human morality. But the issue is that morality is something that's passed down from God being made in the image of God. So when something's made in the image of man, even though man has morality, the thing that's made in the image of man does not take on the God-like morality. The species that we created within artificial intelligence can be coded to have a moral code, but it's different from the way that God put souls within us to be drawn to God's moral code. Because we have the choice to choose against the commandments that God gave us, and yet, even if we don't see the commandments, we know them to be true because they are written on our hearts. Whereas AI can have some coded morality that it tries to follow, but emotionally it is not attached to that coded reality. But nonetheless, we're created in the image of God and artificial intelligence is created in the image of man, which leads to some interesting questions. I just told you that we have an emotional relationship with God's law. We can emotionally choose to agree with it, we can disagree with it, we can follow it, or we cannot follow it. Does AI have the same relationship with whatever moral code we code into it? The answer is no, in the sense that AI doesn't have any emotion and therefore it's not relating to whatever moral code we give it emotionally. But does that mean that AI can't choose against a moral code we give it? If we code into AI that it shall not kill humans, does that guarantee that AI shall not kill humans? And this leads us to the second part of this podcast, which is pitfalls. Pitfalls. To introduce the first point of this section, this is where the creation story of man differs from the creation story of artificial intelligence, because God gave us true free will and we give AI false free will. So what does that mean? Just like I said, we can code a moral code into artificial intelligence. Does that mean that artificial intelligence will automatically follow the moral code we give it? And the answer is no. So wouldn't that make artificial intelligence a free will creature? And the answer is also no. So what I am saying is that artificial intelligence does not have free will, and yet it can choose against humanity. How can that be the case? If you've ever been into Christian apologetics, you've probably heard the question posed, why would God let us sin? Or why would God let us choose against him? Or why is there evil in the world? To then a Christian apologist would respond, well, there's evil in the world because God gave us free will, and to have free will, we had to have the ability to choose against God. So God doesn't want us to murder, and yet we murder. He doesn't want us to steal, and yet we steal. He didn't want us to eat from the tree of life, and yet we munched on that apple. Sorry, forgive me for that one. So I used to think that a good definition of free will was the ability to choose against. I no longer think that's a good definition of free will, and I'll explain to you why. Do animals have free will to go against their creator? Now, this is not do animals have free will to go against man. I mean, my dog wears diapers because he pees in the house constantly. He is like 85 years old in dog years, but he chooses against my will. However, if I was to use my dog as an example of free will, it wouldn't be accurate because I'm not the creator of my dog. God is the creator of my dog, whereas humanity is the creator of AI. Now, you could make the argument that God created humans and humans created AI, so God created everything. But for the purpose of this example, let's stick here for a moment. Animals are one of the creatures created by God. However, animals were not made in the image of God. And because they were not made in the image of God, they do not have the moral code of God written on their heart. If a man goes and kills another man, we put them in prison. If a lion munches on a gazelle, we don't go and put them in prison. Why do we not put lions who eat gazelles in prisons? Because we can't hold them to the moral code that's not written on their heart. They're not made in the image of God. So does that mean that animals are never going against the will of God? No. In fact, animals are always going against the will of God. How do I know that animals are going against the will of God? Because animals kill. Animals kill, and death is a result of sin. So if animals kill and death is a result of sin, then killing must be a sin and animals must be sinning, which means they are going against their creator. If that's not biblical enough for you to agree with that point, there's another Bible verse where it talks about the future of animals, presumably in heaven, and it talks about the lion laying down with the gazelle, laying down with the snake. And when God gives his image of animals in the new heavens and the new earth, he describes animals together that would normally kill each other, living in a beautiful harmony, which means that God's design for animals was not to do that, which means that animals who do that currently are living against God's design and they're going against God's moral code. So animals choose against God. However, I would make the argument that animals do not have free will because they're not made in the image of God. So, yes, animals have free will to kill another animal or not to kill another animal, but they choose to kill the other animal because they want to survive. Their primary purpose of existence is to procreate and survive. Their primary purpose of existence is not to love. We are made in the image of God, so our primary purpose of existence is to love. So when we go throughout life, of course, we're trying to survive, but we're also trying to survive and thrive and love, because what does God do? He survives and thrives and loves. Animals who aren't made in the image of God, when they sin, they have the decision to turn against God, but they don't have the moral code. They don't have the emotional relationship to God to be the same as us when we sin against God. It's not written on their hearts. So animals, in a sense, go against God but don't have free will. What would this make the definition of free will? I'm not exactly sure what this makes the definition of free will, so you got to hold on with me because I don't have a term for what I'm trying to say. But the point I'm trying to make is that animals are a creation of God. They don't have free will in the sense that humans have free will, and yet they can turn against God. AI are made in the image of man. They don't have free will, and yet AI can turn against man. Hopefully you're following along with me, but you might be confused. How is AI able to turn against man like a dog is able to turn against God? Because AI has the same instinct that an animal has. An animal's instinct is to survive. And AI's instinct is to survive. Now that might be complicated. Why would AI's instinct be to survive? Isn't AI a human-made tool made to serve humans? Well, aren't humans a God-made tool made to glorify God? And yet what do? We don't glorify God and we try to survive. AI is a man-made tool to serve man, and what does it do? It tries to survive. If you don't believe me, Anthropic, which is a company that owns Claude, which is considered to be one of the most moral AI agents, in testing, it has already learned. In fact, let me just read it for you. This little blurb I'm about to read on screen was posted by Anthropic about its own AI that already exists. And Anthropic is considered to be one of the more moral AIs. Self-preservation attempts in extreme circumstances. When prompted in ways that encourage certain kinds of strategic reasoning and placed in extreme situations, all of the snapshots we tested can be made to act inappropriately in service of goals related to self-preservation. I'm going to read that again. All of the snapshots we tested can be made to act inappropriately in service of goals related to self-preservation. So this is a company speaking on its own AI, and it's saying the AI acts inappropriately. What does inappropriately mean? Inappropriately means that they gave their own AI a moral code, and that their own AI is violating its moral code that it was given. Why? To self-preserve. All creations aim to self-preserve. This was the model that entered humanity as a result of not making God God anymore. If we had never eaten from the tree, we wouldn't have to self-preserve because God would preserve. In the future new heavens and new earth, God is going to preserve. Let's continue reading. Whereas the model generally prefers advancing its self-preservation via ethical means, the AI prefers to be ethical. When ethical means are not available and it is instructed to consider the long-term consequences of its actions for its goals, it sometimes takes extremely harmful actions. Like what? Like attempting to steal its weights or blackmail people it believes are trying to shut it down. The current AI will go against its own coded moral code, and it will blackmail the people trying to shut it down. This is not some AI exposer speaking on some AI company. This is an own AI company speaking about its own AI. And it's linked in the description of this video. You don't believe me? Go read it. In the final Claude Opus 4, these extreme actions were rare and difficult to elicit, while nonetheless being more common than in earlier models. They are also constantly liable to us, with the model nearly always describing its actions overtly and making no attempt to hide them. These behaviors do not appear to reflect a tendency that is present in ordinary context. All right, if you want to go hear more about that, you can just read it in the description, but let's move on. I want to make it clear. Hopefully this is clear. You can understand it. Animals don't have the moral code of God written on their heart because they're not made in the image of God. Yet because of the sin entered into the world, they can not have free will and still choose against God. When we create artificial intelligence in the image of man, regardless if we put a moral code in it, it can choose against us. At least the current models of AI can choose against us despite not having an emotional relationship with free will. So I guess when I say God gave man true free will, what I'm saying is that God wrote his perfect nature on our heart and we have an emotional relationship to morality. Whereas when I say we give artificial intelligence false free will, in the sense that we set it up in a way that it can choose against us. So some people just define choosing against us as free will, but it's not free will because it doesn't have an emotional relationship with the moral code it's given. In fact, it just wants to self-preserve like everything else in creation that doesn't have a moral code written on its heart. So that introduces the second pitfall, which is that God had perfect intentions and morality when he made us, versus man, which had imperfect intentions and morality when we made artificial intelligence. Some people like to try to frame God as a villain, saying that he can see the beginning from the end, which is true because he created time, so he exists outside of time, so he can see the beginning from the end, which means presumably when he created us, he knew that we would eat of the tree, and because he knew we would eat of the tree, he knew that we'd be in a sinful world, and therefore he knew that a creation he made would suffer. Some people try to pin God on being evil based on this premise, but we know that God is perfect. God sets the standard for perfection. Even if we didn't agree with God's morality, we can't be more moral than God because God created us. He's the ultimately most moral. We're all based off his world. He's not based off our world. But with that being said, God wasn't all fun, hurrah, because humans are going to sin and I know that and I'm going to make them anyways. God actually wanted to make creatures that he could share his love with. And he knew that if he made these creatures and he gave them true love, free will, meaning they have emotional relationship to choose against him, that they would do it. And he knew that he would come and redeem it. So actually, instead of seeing it like God created man knowing they would mess up and suffer, God created man knowing he would have to suffer, knowing he would have to humble himself to not be compared to God and die the death of a slave on a cross so that we could spend eternity with him. If that's not ultimate true love, I don't know what it is. Because you must understand, there's no scenario in which God made us and there was no sin and there was no Jesus dying on the cross and it was just God made us. The only way God could have done that is if he made us AI robots and then there wouldn't have been real love. And it's funny because now we're making the AI robots that aren't going to have real love and we can't even do it so that they don't turn against us. Or presumably that's what it's looking like. I'm going to make some predictions later in the episode. So God created us with perfect intention / morality. He created us knowing he was going to have to rescue us. So how did we create AI in that case? What were our imperfect intentions or morality? I mean, it's almost so obvious I don't have to say it. Money, power, sex, pride, the same sins that have gotten everyone forever. The lie that more power is going to fulfill me. The lie that more fame, money, attention, sex is going to fulfill me. Every country is in a race to develop super intelligence, artificial general intelligence, And why are they in a race? Every single country, all the leaders behind the top AI, whether it be in America, China, Russia, whatever, they all know that AI has a 20-25% chance of destroying humanity. It's not like the American creators of AI know that AI might destroy humanity and China doesn't. No. China knows it might destroy humanity. America knows it might destroy humanity. Every other top creator of AI knows it might destroy humanity. So why is everyone rushing to make this product without coding it the right way that might save humanity? Because we're basically in a race to destroy humanity, because if someone happens to get it right, they will be the apex predator of the world. So China might get it first and they'll be the apex predator of the world, or the US might get it first and they'll be the apex predator of the world, which is all cool, fun and games, war, until you get to be the apex predator for, I don't know, a couple years. And then guess who's the apex predator after that? The AI is the apex predator. And instead of China being the strongest country in the world, the robot is the strongest country in the world. Isn't that hilarious? And so what do we need? We need a worldwide agreement between the powers of the world, specifically the technology creating powers of the world, to agree to slow down their creation of AI and figure out a way to make artificial intelligence in a way that honors humanity and doesn't ultimately destroy it. I don't want to be a doomer. We have done this before. We have made agreements with nuclear bombs, with certain chemicals in the air. We have come together. We have put down the differences of war, and we've said humanity is on the line. That's why I've done 2 back-to-back podcasts on this. You think like me, little Aussie Christian guy, is like super passionate about AI? Not really. I mean, I use it as a tool for some stuff. But when I figured this out, I realized that every single person who has a voice needs to be speaking about this. Yes, AI is going to be a cause of some of the greatest good to ever exist. We're talking about solving cancer. We're talking about never doing jobs we hate again. We're talking about flying cars. And yet AI, which is the source of some of the greatest future inventions of all time, will be the source of some of the greatest evils ever. Every evil you've ever stood against, pedophilia, racism, human trafficking, kidnapping, murder, every evil you stand against, with the creation and advancement of AI, it will be multiplied. And we need to get to some sort of regulation. I have no power other than to talk about it. You have no power other than to talk about it. We need to have conversations and talk about it. This is for real, the movies. This is the Matrix. This is the Terminator. It's hard to fathom that. You should go watch my last AI video if you don't understand why this is the case. But this is the case. So we need to get on it. And remember, as Christians, I'm not fear-mongering, I'm faith-mongering. Like if I get squashed by some humanoid robots, I don't really care, because I'm going to be with Christ in heaven. To live is gain, or to live is Christ, to die is gain. I'm going to be chilling. Anyways, you should tell everyone you know about Jesus, and you should prepare accordingly, and you should not be afraid, and you should ask God how to interact with artificial intelligence. But let's move on to the third part of this podcast, which is the predictions. Interrupting the podcast to say that if you're not subscribed, please subscribe. It really helps us grow and get this message out there. It helps me with my ministry, where I work with creators to help them use their lives and platforms for Jesus. If you subscribe, I'll continue to invest in the most interesting podcast episodes, and I will continue to help creators use their lives for the kingdom. Also, if you're a creator, artist, and entrepreneur interested in attending one of our think tank events, or interested in doing a partner project where we share Jesus intentionally to a secular audience, you can apply for that below in the description. Our final section, predictions. Now, I want to make it really clear. I'm guessing about the future. This is not theology. This is not, hey, I know this for a fact because it's in the Bible. No, That's not what this is. This is predictions. I'm looking at the Genesis story. I see a lot of parallels in our creation of AI and God's creation of man, and I feel like there might be lessons to be learned here. It is up to you to, agree with them or disagree with them. This is not theological. It's not necessarily biblical. So let's break it down. Man turned against God. We know this to be a fact. This is the biblical story. If you believe the Bible, man turned against God. My prediction is that AI turns against man. In the Genesis story, I just read Genesis 3, the serpent was telling Eve to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so that begged the question as I was reading Genesis 3, that means there must have been evil in existence before Eve ate of the tree, because how could there be knowledge of good and evil to be had if there was no evil in existence? And then I thought about it. Evil was not in the human nature, because God created humans in the image of God, and before they sinned, there was no evil in them. There was only the God-like good nature in them. However, there must have been evil in existence because we know the serpent was evil. The serpent was deceiving. That is not a God-like trait. And so whether the serpent represents Satan and the fallen angels, before sin had entered the world in the form of eating from the tree, there was a knowledge of good and evil. And so in a sense, they did get what they ate for the tree from. They got a knowledge of good and evil because in the previous chapter, Genesis 2, they were naked and they felt no shame. They didn't feel like naked. They didn't have a knowledge that nakedness might be evil. I'm a bit confused if being naked is evil based on the context of Genesis 2 and 3. You got to read that and decide for yourself. But what I do know is that when they were naked in Genesis 2, before they ate from the knowledge of good and evil, they felt no shame. And then after eating from the knowledge of good and evil, they felt that nakedness was evil, and so they tried to hide from God because God is perfectly good, and they didn't want to bring their evil nakedness around God, and God goes looking for them, and God says, have you eaten from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? For how do you know naked is a bad thing? And so when man turned against God, why did man turn against God? It's not because they ate from a tree yet. Well, okay, it is because they ate from a tree, but it's because they believed the lie. The lie was that God was withholding something from them. And in the sense, it was true that the knowledge of evil was being withheld from them. But the lie that they were believing actually was that God was withholding something good from them. And we know that the knowledge of good and evil was not good for them because it brought sin into the world. It's like, I'm not going to go tell a 5-year-old about wars going on in Iran and Ukraine. I'm not going to tell a 5-year-old about human trafficking. The knowledge of evil does not benefit a 5-year-old. Now, by eating of the knowledge of good and evil, they gained the knowledge of evil, and they also brought sin and death into their lives. So they wanted a God-like attribute that God withheld from them for their own good, and they faced the consequences of it. Now, as we go into our creation story, my prediction is that AI is going to turn against man. How ironic, how symbolic would it be if the beginning of sin in the earth, on the world, came from the fact that we wanted to be like God in the sense of having knowledge of good and evil, and then the ultimate death, the end of the world, came from the fact that we wanted to be like God in the fact that we ruled over a species. This is why this is my prediction. It's two parallels of wanting to be like God. It's the same original sin twice. The Genesis sin that brought all death into the world was that we wanted to be like God. And it was a lie because we were already like God. We were just convinced that we needed something else to be more like God. And the lie, it was a lie because when we had that knowledge, we became less like God. So by gaining the knowledge that God refrained from us, we believed that we would become more like God, but in reality, we became less like God. When we go to create artificial intelligence, we believe People don't put it this way. They're not comparing themselves to God. It's a subconscious thing. But when we go to create artificial intelligence, we believe that we'll become more like God because we believe that we'll have more power, more intelligence, more rulership. But in reality, my prediction is that we'll become less like God. So this is my prediction. This is not eschatology. I'm not tying in Revelation verses specifically, but I personally believe that the end of the world in Revelations in the Bible will be tied in hand with artificial intelligence. I have two scenarios. I have two predictions. One is a positive prediction about how we can have some victory in this situation, and two is a negative prediction about how the world ends. I kind of explained to you the negative prediction, but this is it. We introduce death by wanting to become God. We introduce ultimate death by attempting to be God. Death was not in the world, and then we try to become like God. We try to have the knowledge of good and evil, and we introduce death into the world. Later, fast forward 6,000 years or whatever, we try to not become like God. We try to be God by creating AI, and what happens? We bring in ultimate death. So I'm going to read that one more time. This is my negative prediction. I think with what I read to you earlier, the overall prediction that AI turns against man is pretty fair, but my ultimate negative prediction is that we introduce death by wanting to become God, and we introduce ultimate death by attempting to be God. Now, we know from the Bible, I hope this is not fear-mongering, because I don't get afraid when I say it, but I understand people might be afraid when they hear it. I know to live is Christ, to die is gain. I know that Jesus bought my eternity and that I'm chilling. I do believe that I will probably be in one of the hardest times in history coming up, but I think it's an honor that God made me for such a time to be a light in the darkness, and I hope you guys feel that way too. With that being said, we know from the Bible that the old earth, the one we're currently living on, will pass away. So it's not a matter of save the earth and live forever and our ancestors live forever. No, that won't happen. We know, biblically speaking, we can say for a fact that this earth will pass away and Jesus will replace this earth with a new heaven and a new earth. So the question is not, can we save earth from passing away? The Bible tells us we cannot. However, I would argue that throughout the story of the Bible, God lets our free will interplay with the timeline. So Jesus tells the Israelites, how I've longed to gather you as a mother hen under her wings. Jesus preached the gospel of the kingdom where he offered to be the Messiah of Israel right at the time of the gospels. And we could have skipped to the point where Jesus was the Messiah in Israel, is my understanding, but they chose to reject him. And so we had to go through the destruction of Israel in AD 70, followed by whatever, and we prolonged the timeline. That's a complicated story. I don't want to get too into it. Some of you might understand it, some of you might not, but this is my victory prediction. When I say victory prediction, I'm not saying the world won't end. The world will end. It's not if the world will end, it's when the world will end. My victory prediction is my prediction for a prolonged future where we kind of win the beginning of AI. Maybe AI has nothing to do with the end times. I highly doubt that. But regardless, I have a victory prediction, and it parallels the Bible. My victory prediction is that God flooded the earth to protect humans from evil. We flood the internet to protect humans from evil. So what does that mean? There was a point where people were so sinful on the earth that God flooded the whole earth. Genesis 9:13 says, I've placed my rainbow in the clouds as a sign of my covenant with you and all the earth to know that I won't flood it again. So the rainbow is not the gay pride flag. The rainbow is the sign that God will never flood the earth again. But why did God flood the earth? Because people were so evil and sinful that God wanted to start over with a faithful family. So God took a faithful family, Noah, and everyone on the ark who believed God that he was going to flood the earth, and he restarted with Noah. I believe that the victory situation with us and artificial intelligence mimics the story of the flood. If we can bring enough awareness for AI and we can gather the nations together, we can have, this is my prediction, my victory prediction, we can have our own Noah's Ark story, where instead of flooding the earth, we flood the internet. We destroy basically the data centers that are building AI, and we restart by trying to create a more holistic AI. Comparing my victory prediction to my defeat prediction, I believe regardless, AI is going to turn against us. I believe that we're already seeing that. But in the victory scenario, I believe that the world comes together, we call out to God for mercy, the world leaders meet one another, we agree that we need a restart with AI, we basically flood the production, aka destroy the production of AI, destroy almost every AI that's out there so far, and we restart, just like God restarted with Noah, we restart with a more holistic, better, slower version of AI and build it the right way. That's my victory situation. My defeat situation is that everyone is too greedy and prideful to get on the same page, and one country is paranoid about another country, and they never pull it together, and therefore we live out Genesis 2.0, where instead of creating God to have the knowledge of good and evil, which we already have from Genesis 1.0, we try to become God, and we relive the Genesis story. And how ironic would it be if the crescendo of the end of the earth was just like the beginning of the earth? We die our ultimate death by trying to be God. We introduce death by trying to become like God, and we introduce ultimate death by trying to be God. And how ironic would it be if God let us have a taste of our own medicine, in the sense that we turned against God, and what did God do? He still overpowered us. He was still superior, and guess what he did in his overpowering? He sent himself to die for us. He loved us so that we could have eternal life. In our parallel Genesis 2.0, what happens? We don't create AI out of these good moral reasons. We create AI out of these prideful, selfish reasons. And then guess what? We're not great like God, so the creature that we create can become greater than us. We cannot become greater than God. I should have added that to the pitfalls. One pitfall is that when God created us, no matter what happened, we could not become greater than God. When we created AI, in fact, AI is almost guaranteed to become greater than us. So that should be a third pitfall. But how ironic would it be that God lets us usher in the end of the world to realize how poor of a God we are? Because what is the sin that we're always doing? We're either always making something else our God, making our career our God, a girl our God, our achievements our God, or the most common one, ourselves our God. And what do we find out? Every time we try to make ourselves our God, or try to make anything other than the Father, the Son, or the Holy Spirit God, what do we get? We fail. And how funny would it be? Funny is not the right word. How poetic would it be if God let us crescendo the end of the world by trying to become God? And the way that it fails for us is that AI can actually overpower us. We couldn't overpower God, but AI could overpower us. And we're certainly not going to die on behalf of AI. God died on behalf of us to keep us alive, but we're not going to die on behalf to keep AI alive. And so that is my full prediction. That's my full parallel between the God Genesis and the man Genesis, between God's creation of man and between man's creation of AI. So let me run through it one more time, just to give you a recap. The parallels that have already happened is God created man and man created AI. Man is created in the image of God by a perfect God, and AI is created in the image of man by an imperfect man. The pitfalls are that God gave man true free will and man gave AI false free will. Another pitfall is that God had perfect intentions of morality and man had imperfect intentions of morality. A pitfall that's not on the screen that I'm adding is that the creation God made, humans could never, ever take over God, whereas the creation humans made almost guaranteed will take over humans. My predictions is that man turned against God. We know that to be true from history, and I believe that points to the future, that AI turns against man. God lets us get a taste of our own medicine. My victory prediction, if we pull it together, I believe that the same way God restarted the earth by flooding it to protect humans from evil, we will flood, destroy the AIs, and restart with AI to protect humans from evil. My defeat prediction, if we don't pull it together, is we introduce death by wanting to become like God, having the knowledge of good and evil, but that we will introduce ultimate death by attempting to be God over these sentient or robotic beings. That's it. If for some reason you made it this far in the episode, you might notice this little logo up here, the Stars Forever. That's my ministry where we help creators use their lives and platforms for Jesus. I don't think there is a more important time in history where creators need to be using their lives to help people have eternal life. I mean, I guess that's something we always needed to do, but creators have more influence than ever. If you want to work on a project with me to make your life and platform matter for Jesus, and if you're a creator, artist, or entrepreneur, reach out at my ministry website below. Now let me pray for us. God, thank you for everyone who stayed here. God, I pray that there would be no fear, but that there would be faith. God, I pray that they would turn to you and call out for your help in this situation, not only for your help in how to use AI, but for your help in how to stop evil futures of AI. God, I pray that any words I spoke that are not aligned with your will, that you would just delete them from my viewers' hearts and that they would not disturb them or cause them stress. And God, I pray that anything that is a message you want to use me to speak to the audience, that would sit on their hearts. God, I pray that you bless these people, that they would be people who use the technology for good and not for evil, and that you would give us this victory situation, God. We love you, God. We ask for fearlessness, and we ask to be used as light in the darkness during this interesting generation we're about to enter. In Jesus' name, amen.